In 1943, a Marine on Guadalcanal traded a good knife for 1 can of peaches. That is how badly men wanted real food. Most people think Marines ate steak and eggs before storming a beach. The truth is stranger. Number 16 on this list was hated so violently that men hurled the cans into the ocean. Number 3 was believed to predict who would die before sunrise. These 25 meals fueled the men who took Iwo Jima and held Koen. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down. Number 25. Hardtack. Long after most armies had moved on, hard bread still turned up in Marine supply lines in the early years of the Second World War. These pale, dense crackers were nothing but flour, water, and salt, baked until every trace of moisture was gone. They could ride in a sea bag for a year and never spoil. Marines called them worm castles and tooth dullers, and both names were earned. A man could crack a molar biting into one cold, so he dropped it into hot coffee until it went soft, or crumbled it into bacon grease and fried it into a gray hash that at least tasted of something. In the island campaigns of the Pacific, when supply ships fell behind and the galley went dark, hardtack was often the only thing between a Marine and an empty stomach. Nobody loved it. Everybody ate it. It kept men on their feet when nothing else could reach them. Number 24. Powdered eggs. Nothing tested a young Marine's loyalty to the Corps quite like his first tray of powdered eggs at boot camp. Fresh eggs could not survive a troop ship crossing the Pacific, so the military shipped them dehydrated in tins to be reconstituted with water on a hot griddle by the hundreds of pounds. The result was a rubbery yellow slab that smelled faintly of sulfur and jiggled in a way real eggs never did. Mess cooks did what they could, folding in powdered milk and a heavy hand of salt and pepper to fight the flat, chalky taste and griddling them crispy at the edges, which honestly helped. A recruit at Paris Island learned fast that you ate what was on the tray, and you ate it quick because the drill instructor was already counting. Men who grew up on farm-fresh eggs never forgot the betrayal of that first bite. But by week 3, they were shoveling it down like everyone else. Number 23. Bug juice. Every Marine mess hall from the 1940s onward had a dispenser of it, a garish, sweet fruit drink in a color that did not exist in nature. Bright red, radioactive orange, a green that glowed. It came as a powder mixed with water in enormous vats, loaded with sugar and just enough acid to strip the fur off your teeth. Marines called it bug juice, and the jokes wrote themselves. Men swore the same crystals could scrub the grease off a galley floor, and a few claimed the cooks did exactly that. But out in the heat of a training field, that ice-cold, sugary hit was pure relief. It was cold, it was sweet, and it was there. A recruit sweating through a summer at San Diego would down 3 cups without breathing. Nobody asked what flavor it was supposed to be. There was no flavor. There was only red, orange, and green. Number 22. Vienna sausages. Small, pale, and slippery canned Vienna sausages were the little cylinders of mystery meat that traveled everywhere a Marine went. Packed tight in a stubby tin swimming in salty broth, they needed no cooking, no heat, no preparation of any kind. You cracked the lid, tipped the can back, and ate them cold with your fingers. In garrison, mess cooks browned them in a skillet alongside beans or eggs. In the field, they were survival in a can that fit in a pocket. The texture was soft, almost creamy, and the flavor was mostly salt and smoke, with a whisper of actual pork. Marines ribbed each other endlessly about what was really inside them, and nobody wanted a straight answer. But when a man had been awake for 20 hours and had not eaten since dawn, that little tin of pale sausages tasted like a full meal. Number 21. Beanie Weenies. Franks and beans, or beanie weenies as every Marine called them, was the hot meal that showed up more than any other. Navy beans simmered in a sweet tomato and molasses sauce, studded with sliced hot dogs cut into thick coins, served by the ladle over a steel tray. It was cheap to make in enormous quantities, which is exactly why the Corps loved it. A single field kitchen could feed a whole company out of a few cans and a pot the size of a bathtub. The beans delivered filling starch, and the Franks gave it just enough meat to feel like dinner. Marines ate it with a slice of white bread to sop up the sauce and did not complain, because it was hot and there was plenty. It turned up in the mess hall, in the field ration line, and in a can you could heat over a fire. Men got sick of it and ate it anyway. Number 20, corned beef hash. Salty, greasy, and browned to a crisp at the edges, corned beef hash was the breakfast that woke a Marine up whether he wanted it or not. It came out of a can, a solid pink brick of shredded cured beef and diced potato that mess cooks pressed onto a screaming hot griddle and left alone until a dark crust formed on the bottom. That crust was the whole point. Scraped up and flipped, it delivered a salty, meaty crunch that plain eggs could only dream of. Served with a scoop of those powdered eggs and a slab of toast, it made a breakfast that could carry a man through a morning of hard work. The canned version rode along on ships and into the field, where it could be eaten cold if it had to be, though nobody preferred it. It was heavy, fatty, and sat in your gut like ballast. On a cold morning, that was exactly what you wanted. Number 19, chicken a la king. Here was the mess hall's attempt at something fancy, and it fooled nobody, but men ate it gratefully anyway. Chunks of chicken, or something close to it, suspended in a thick cream sauce with peas and pimento, ladled steaming over toast, biscuits, or rice. The Corps loved it for the same reason it loved everything else on this list. It stretched a little meat across a lot of men. Some mess sergeants did it well, seasoning the sauce until it actually tasted of something. And on those days, the line moved slow because men went back for seconds. Done poorly, it was pale paste with the occasional surprise of gristle. But hot cream sauce over toast on a cold morning in the barracks was comfort, and comfort was rare. It felt for a moment almost like a meal your mother might have made. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about Marine Chow gets interesting. In every mess hall, the most powerful man was not the officer. It was the mess sergeant. He decided what went on the tray, how much of it, and whether a hungry Marine walked away satisfied or grumbling. A good one could coax real flavor out of garbage ingredients, and the men under him knew it and protected him. A bad one could ruin morale faster than any drill. And then there was mess duty, the dreaded rotation where Marines were pulled to scrub pots, peel mountains of potatoes, and haul trash from before dawn until after dark. It was hot, greasy, thankless labor. But the men on mess duty ate first, and they ate best. There was always a trade buried inside the misery. That was the Corps, in one lesson. Number 18, grilled Spam. No single canned food defined the World War II Marine like Spam. Hormel shipped it by the millions of pounds across the Pacific. That rectangular block of pink pork shoulder and ham suspended in its own salty jelly, and it turned up at every meal in every theater. Mess cooks sliced it thick and seared it on the griddle until the edges caramelized and crackled. And honestly, grilled hot with a little char, it was good. Marines fried it with eggs, chopped it into rice, and mashed it into whatever they had. It never spoiled and delivered a heavy hit of fat and protein, but there was so much of it, month after month, that men grew to resent the very sight of the can. They cursed it and ate every bite. Decades later, Spam remained a beloved staple across the Pacific Islands because the men who had been fed it never quite let it go. Number 17, Salisbury steak. The Marine Corps could not afford to serve real steak, so it served the next best thing and called it steak with a straight face. Salisbury steak was seasoned ground beef, stretched with breadcrumbs and onion, pressed into an oval patty, and smothered in a thick brown gravy that hid a multitude of sins. Served over mashed potatoes with a scoop of canned peas, it was one of the more satisfying hot meals a Marine could hope to find on his tray. The gravy was the magic. It kept the dry patty moist, soaked into the potatoes, and gave the whole plate the feel of a real supper. Mess halls turned it out by the hundreds because ground beef was cheap and the gravy stretched it even further. Men who grew up on their mother's meatloaf recognized it as a cousin, close enough to spark a little homesickness. On a good night, with enough gravy, it was one of the meals nobody grumbled about. Number 16. Ham and lima beans. Now we arrive at the most hated ration in Marine Corps history. Ham and lima beans came in a sea ration can, chunks of fatty ham swimming among pale, mealy lima beans, in a thin, greasy sauce that congealed into something unspeakable when it went cold. And in the field, it was almost always cold. Marines despised it so thoroughly that they gave it a nickname far too crude to say here, a name whispered with genuine hatred around every foxhole from the Pacific to Vietnam. Men traded away every other can in their case just to be rid of it. Some flung the tins into the ocean or buried them rather than eat them. The beans had a chalky, waxy texture that no amount of hot sauce could rescue, and the ham fat turned to slick, white paste in the cold. And yet when a man had eaten everything else and been awake for 2 days, even this got choked down. Hunger, it turned out, could beat any grudge. Number 15. Powdered milk. Fresh milk could not cross an ocean, so the Marine Corps shipped it as a powder, and a generation of men learned to drink it and never quite forgive it. Reconstituted with water, it had a thin, faintly cooked flavor and a chalky finish. Fresh milk never carried, and no matter how cold it was served, something stayed slightly off. Marines drank it anyway because it was there, because it went with the coffee, and because a growing 19-year-old needed the calories. Mess cooks also folded it into everything, into the powdered eggs, the mashed potatoes, the cream sauces, and the puddings, using it wherever a recipe called for dairy the supply chain could not provide. For boys who had grown up drinking fresh milk straight from the bottle, that first chalky glass was a small, quiet reminder that home was a very long way off. Number 14. Meatloaf. Every Marine had an opinion about the mess hall meatloaf, and most of those opinions were suspicious. It was ground beef stretched as far as it could go, bound with breadcrumbs, onion, and egg, sometimes with oatmeal, worked in, baked in enormous pans, and sliced into thick gray slabs. On a good day, it was moist and seasoned and topped with a smear of tomato or brown gravy, and it tasted like something a man might actually have chosen to eat. On a bad day, it was dense, dry, and full of surprises, and men joked darkly about what had really gone into it. Served with mashed potatoes and canned vegetables, it was the definition of a workman's supper, filling and cheap and reliably present. The leftovers came back the next day cold, sliced onto white bread as a sandwich. Nothing went to waste in a Marine mess hall. Second pattern break. Here is what the nutrition actually looked like. A Marine in the field was a furnace. Between marching under a full pack, digging in, standing watch, and fighting, he could burn 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, more than double what an ordinary man needs. That is why every meal on this list leaned so hard on fat, salt, and starch. It was not carelessness. It was math. The Corps needed to pack the maximum possible energy into food that could survive a year in a warehouse, ship across an ocean, and be eaten cold in a hole in the ground. Fat carried the most calories per ounce, so the rations were fatty. Salt preserved the meat and replaced what men sweated out, so the food was salty. The bland, heavy, greasy meals that recruits complained about were engineered to keep a body running under a load no civilian job would ever demand. It was not fine dining. It was fuel, designed by men who understood exactly what a Marine's body was about to endure. Number 13. Chili con carne. Of all the canned sea ration entrees, chili con carne was one of the few that men actually hoped to draw. Ground beef and beans in a spiced red sauce, it had enough seasoning and enough heat to feel like real food which put it far ahead of most of what came in the case. Heated over a fire or a heat tab, it went from acceptable to genuinely good, the fat melting into the sauce and the whole thing turning rich and warming. Marines carried little bottles of hot sauce specifically to doctor cans like this one, and a splash could turn a decent meal into a memorable one. In the mess hall, chili came out of vats by the gallon, ladled over rice or eaten with cornbread and crackers, stretching a modest amount of beef across a hungry company. When a man opened his case and found chili, it counted as a good day. Number 12. Beef stew. Beef stew was the workhorse of the field kitchen and the sea ration case alike, and Marines had a complicated relationship with it. Chunks of beef, diced potato, carrot, and a few peas in a thick brown gravy, it was a complete meal in a single can or a single ladle. Heated properly, it was honest, filling comfort food, the kind of thing that put a tired man back together after a long, cold day. The trouble was the field, where heat was a luxury and men often ate it cold, straight from the tin, the gravy set into a greasy jelly and the fat gone white and waxy on top. Cold beef stew was a grim experience that a lot of Marines never forgot. But in the mess hall, or in the field with a fire and a little time, it was one of the better things a man could hope to be handed. Meat, vegetables, and gravy all at once. It asked nothing but a spoon. Number 11. Navy bean soup. The Marine Corps ran on beans, and navy bean soup was the purest expression of that fact. Dried navy beans simmered for hours with a ham bone or chunks of salt pork, an onion, and not much else, until the beans broke down and thickened the broth into something creamy and smoky and deeply satisfying. It cost almost nothing to make and fed enormous numbers of men, which made it a mess sergeant's favorite. The ham bone gave the whole pot a richness that the cheap ingredients had no right to produce, and a slice of bread or a square of cornbread turned a bowl of it into a full supper. It reheated better than almost anything, so the same pot fed men across 2 or 3 meals without losing a thing. Cheap, hot, and honest, it was the meal the Corps could always fall back on when the budget ran thin. Number 10. Dehydrated mashed potatoes. Real potatoes were heavy, perishable, and a nightmare to ship across an ocean, so the Marine Corps turned to dehydrated potato flakes, and the mess hall mashed potato was born. Whipped up with water and powdered milk on a huge scale, they came out smooth and fluffy and looking exactly like the real thing, which is where the honesty ended. The flavor was flatter, the texture a little too uniform, missing the small lumps and the earthy taste of an actual mashed potato. But drowned in gravy, which is how they were nearly always served, the difference all but vanished. And drowned in gravy is how the Corps liked everything. Mashed potatoes were the great foundation of the Marine tray, the neutral bed under the Salisbury steak, the meatloaf, and the beef stew. They soaked up sauce, filled a hungry man, and cost almost nothing in bulk. Men who never learned the difference ate them by the mountain. Number 9. Cornbread and biscuits. Bread was sacred in a Marine mess hall, and the galley bakers worked through the night to keep it coming. Cornbread came out of the oven in enormous golden sheets, dense and slightly sweet, cut into thick squares that crumbled into a bowl of beans or soup and turned it into something greater. Biscuits came out hot and flaky, split open and drowned in gravy or spread with whatever butter and jam the supply line had sent along. For men eating an endless parade of canned and powdered food, fresh-baked bread was a small, daily miracle, the one thing made from scratch that very morning. The smell of it before dawn could pull a tired man out of his rack. Marines used it to sop up every drop of gravy, every bit of bean broth, every trace of sauce, because a Marine did not leave food on a plate. When everything else came from a can, the bread was proof that someone had actually cooked. Third pattern break. Here is the part nobody talks about. Food in the Corps was never only about hunger. For a 19-year-old thousands of miles from home, that tray in the Chow line was one of the last threads connecting him to the world he left behind. The meatloaf that reminded him of his mother's kitchen. The pancakes on Sunday that felt like a childhood morning. The pound cake that tasted, for one bite, like a birthday. Men who would not admit to being homesick would go quiet over a meal that reminded them of a table back home, of a chair that was empty now because they were here. And when the food was bad, which was often, the shared misery of it became its own kind of bond. Marines complained about the Chow together, cursed it together, and in doing so, held each other up. The meal was never just the meal. It was a taste of home, or a joke to survive the lack of one. Either way, it kept men going in a way calories alone never could. Number 8, bread pudding. Nothing went to waste in a Marine galley, and bread pudding was the proof. Born entirely from leftovers and refusing to be thrown out. Stale bread, the heels and the dried-out slices nobody wanted, torn into chunks and soaked in a custard of powdered milk, powdered eggs, sugar, and cinnamon, then baked until the top went golden and the inside turned soft and rich. It transformed garbage into dessert, and the men who ate it never had to know where it came from. Warm from the oven, maybe with a thin, sweet sauce poured over the top, it was genuine comfort, the kind of sweet, spiced, custardy thing that made a hard day feel a little softer at the end. Mess cooks loved it because it cost nothing, using up the bread that would otherwise have been tossed. Marines loved it because dessert of any kind was a rare gift. It was thrift and comfort baked into the same pan, and it disappeared fast every single time. Number 7, Apple Brown Betty. When the mess hall wanted to give the men a treat that would not break the supply budget, out came the Apple Brown Betty. Sliced apples, usually from a can, layered with buttered breadcrumbs and a heavy dose of cinnamon and sugar, baked until the top crisped and the fruit went soft and syrupy underneath. It was a poor cousin to a real apple pie, without the crust, but warm and sweet and spiced enough to satisfy a man who had not tasted proper dessert in weeks. Like the bread pudding, it leaned on stale bread and cheap canned fruit, which is why it appeared so often. Served hot, sometimes with a splash of that reconstituted milk poured over it, it filled the mess hall with the smell of cinnamon and made the whole room feel, for a moment, a little more like home. Men who would never have looked twice at it in civilian life scraped the pan clean. Number 6, Jell-O. It seems almost too simple to make a list like this, but for a Marine, gelatin was a genuine highlight, and the reason was refrigeration. To set properly, Jell-O needed to be kept cold, and cold was a luxury the field never offered. So a wobbling square of bright red or green gelatin on the tray meant one thing. You were somewhere with a working icebox, somewhere with reliable power and supply, somewhere safe. It was the taste of being in garrison instead of in the field, of a base that had its act together. Beyond the symbolism, it was just a small, sweet, cold pleasure in a diet of hot, heavy, greasy food, and men welcomed the change. Mess cooks sometimes suspended canned fruit cocktail inside it, or layered it, turning a simple dessert into something that looked almost fancy on the steel tray. It jiggled, it glowed, it tasted of sugar, and not much else, and Marines ate it with something close to affection. Number 5, pound cake. Ask any Marine who carried sea rations which item he prized most, and a great many will say the pound cake. Tucked into the case among the dreaded ham and lima beans and the endless crackers, that little tin of dense, buttery yellow cake was treasure. It was moist where everything else was dry, sweet where everything else was salty, and it survived in the can without turning to dust the way the crackers did. Men hoarded it, traded for it, and saved it for the end of a long day like a reward they had earned. Some crumbled it into their instant coffee for a field dessert, and some just ate it slowly, making it last. In a diet built around fat and salt and monotony, That small square of real cake was a piece of the civilian world a man could hold in his hand. It was the single, most beloved thing in the ration case, and for good reason. It tasted like something worth surviving for. Number 4. Griddle cakes. Sunday morning in a Marine mess hall meant pancakes, or griddle cakes as the Corps called them, and for men worn down by powdered eggs and canned hash, they were the highlight of the week. Cooked in stacks on a flat top the size of a door, they came out hot and golden, served with a pour of thin syrup and, if the supply line had been kind, a pat of butter. They were nothing fancy, sometimes a little dense or dark at the edges, but warm and sweet and made from batter that morning. And that was enough. For a young Marine, a plate of pancakes could conjure a Sunday from childhood, a kitchen table, a family that felt very far away. Men lined up early for them and went back for more when the cooks allowed it. In a life measured out in cans and powder, the weekly griddle cake was a small, reliable joy, the closest the Chow line ever came to a treat that felt like home. Number 3. Charms candy. Here is the one that sounds like a joke and was deadly serious to the men who lived it. Tucked into the field rations was a little pack of Charms, a hard, fruit-flavored candy, and among Marines in Vietnam, it was believed to be cursed. The superstition ran deep. Eat the Charms, and you invited bad luck, rain that would not stop, a convoy that would not roll, worse, a firefight, a wound, a man who did not come home. Marines threw the candy away unopened rather than tempt fate, flinging it into the bush the moment they found it. A man who ate them openly might be told, dead seriously, to knock it off before he got someone killed. And right beside that cursed candy sat the John Wayne bar, a chocolate disc so hard men joked only John Wayne himself was tough enough to eat it, and the little can opener called the John Wayne, too. Belief and grim humor packed into a ration box, carried by men who had learned not to take any luck for granted. Fourth pattern break. Here is how Marines actually heated their food. Out in the field, a hot meal was not something the supply line handed you. You made it yourself, however you could. Early on, men used little heat tablets that burned slow and smelled of chemicals, or they built tiny fires when the situation allowed. But the trick every Vietnam Marine knew was C4. That is right, the plastic explosive. A pinch of it, torn off and lit, burned hot and fast and clean, and it would heat a can of beef stew in under a minute. It was against every rule and everyone did it, because the alternative was cold ham and lima beans set into grease. The danger was real. You never stamped on burning C4 to put it out, because stamping it could set it off, and men learned that the hard way. But a Marine will do almost anything for a hot meal. It says everything about how much a warm can of food was worth out there. Number 2. Coffee. If beans were the food that ran the Corps, coffee was the fuel that ran the Marine. It came strong, black, and bitter from enormous urns in the mess hall, and it came as instant powder in the ration case, mixed with water heated any way a man could manage. It was the first thing a Marine reached for before dawn, and the thing that got him through the long, cold hours of standing watch when his body begged for sleep. Marines drank it constantly, gallon after gallon, and they drank it however they could get it. Some mixed the crystals with sugar and creamer from the ration pack. Some crumbled that prized pound cake into it. Some ate the coffee powder dry for the jolt. It was warmth, alertness, and ritual, a small fixed point in a day that had no schedule and no mercy. A Marine could go without a hot meal. He did not want to go without coffee. Number 1. SOS. At the top of the list is the meal every Marine remembers, the one they all complained about and half of them secretly missed. Creamed chipped beef on toast, known throughout the Corps by a nickname built around the initials SOS, a name too crude to print in full, but which every veteran will say with a grin. Thin slices of dried, salty beef torn into a thick white gravy of flour, milk, and butter, then ladled steaming over 2 slices of toast. It was cheap, it was heavy, it was gray, and it was served for breakfast so often that men grew to curse the very sight of it. But here is the truth nobody quite admits. On a cold morning, hot and rich over crisp toast, it stuck to a man's ribs and carried him through a brutal day like almost nothing else could. It fed Marines through World War II, through Korea, through Vietnam, and long after. They hated it, they joked about it, and decades later, old men still make it in their own kitchens because it tastes like the men they used to be. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. The SOS, the Beanie Weenies, the Apple Brown Betty. Then tell me in the comments if it was as rough as you expected, or if those men knew something we forgot. Tell me if your father or grandfather ever made SOS at home and called it by that name. Because these were not just meals. They fed the men who did the hardest jobs this country ever asked of anyone, and every tray was a small piece of home in a place that had none.